In late spring, around the same time the rhododendrons start to bloom along the back fence, I remember hearing the sound of bicycle wheels crunching over gravel. Then nothing. No crash, no call, just silence where sound should have been. I stepped out with a sandwich in one hand, calling her name into the soft breeze. And that was the moment I knew something had gone wrong. I just didn't know how wrong. Not yet. Before we start, tap subscribe to help uncover stories they tried to bury and make sure no name stays forgotten. My name is Laura Forrester. I'm 52 now. I live in a small town in Washington State called Cedar Brook Hollow. Population just over 6,000, surrounded by pine and cedar forests that always seem a little damp even in July. Back then I worked as a pastry chef at a place called the Morning Roost. I had the morning shift started before sunrise home by mid-afternoon. It gave me time to be with my daughter. Emily. She was 8, all freckles and curls and those knees that were never quite healed from the last tumble. Our house sat on the edge of town, a 2-story with peeling white shutters and a yard big enough for a swing set and a makeshift bike path she'd carved with her tires. It was the kind of place where people didn't lock their doors until after dark, where you waved to your neighbors whether you liked them or not. Emily would ride her pink bike in slow loops around the house while I cooked or folded laundry. I could always hear her giggle when she hit the bump at the back corner too fast. It became part of the background like bird song or the hum of the fridge. 12 years later, I still remember the exact moment that hum went quiet. It was a Monday in late May. I pulled into the driveway at 3:17 p.m., same time as always. The air smelled like warm pine and cut grass. My hands still had powdered sugar on them from the morning batch of cinnamon rolls. I set my utensils on the counter, hung my apron over the chair, and headed upstairs for a shower. But halfway up the phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but something in my chest tightened. I answered. "Miss Forrester," the voice said. It was deeper than I remembered, but I knew who it was. Detective Dean Harland, the lead on Emily's case. A name I hadn't heard in years. "I'm sorry to call like this," he said, "but something's come up. It's important. Can I come by?" I gripped the banister. My mouth went dry. "What is it?" I asked. There was a pause. "We've found something. Related to Emily." That was all he said. But that was enough. I told him, "Yes, of course. Please come." Then I hung up, turned off the stove I hadn't touched, and sat down at the kitchen table, still in my flour-stained clothes, heart hammering in my chest, staring out at the backyard. The same yard where Emily had last been seen, and where for 12 long years nothing had ever come back. Detective Harlan showed up exactly 15 minutes later, just like he said he would. I was already waiting by the front door, keys in hand, purse over my shoulder. He didn't come inside, just gave me a short nod and said, "We should go." The drive through town was quiet. I sat in the passenger seat watching the familiar streets pass by the same stop signs, the same mailboxes I'd driven past every day for years without a second thought. We were heading toward Oak Ridge Road, and as soon as we turned the corner, my stomach dropped. I passed this house every day, I said more to myself than to him. It was one of those larger cedar-sided homes, tucked back from the road, set up as a rental property. There were cars in the driveway now, and yellow tape stretched across the garage. It didn't look like anything unusual had happened, just a renovation, maybe. Except for the officers, the cameras, the white forensic suits moving slowly in and out of the open garage. We pulled into the driveway and parked. Harlan didn't speak, just motioned for me to follow. A man in a reflective vest met us near the tape. "This is Ryan Johnson," Harlan said. "He's the foreman who made the discovery." Johnson gave me a stiff nod. "We were breaking up the garage floor for plumbing work when we found it. Looked like it had been there a long time." He led us inside, stepping over a broken section of concrete. The floor had been chipped away in a rough circle maybe 3 feet across, and at the bottom of the shallow pit, half buried in dust and old cement, was a small pink bicycle. The moment I saw it, my knees nearly gave out. I didn't have to get closer. I knew. The white basket was still attached to the front, crushed in at one corner. The handlebar streamers, purple and pink tattered, now hung limp like soaked ribbon. "That's hers," I said. "That's Emily's bike." Harland crouched near the edge, studying it. "You're sure?" I nodded, pointing. "Those streamers. She wouldn't let anyone take them off. I bought replacements twice because they kept getting tangled. She always wanted them to match her sneakers." I tried to keep my voice steady, but something broke near the end. I covered my mouth with my hand and just stood there staring at it. It was like time collapsed in on itself. That bike hadn't been touched in 12 years, but in my mind I could still see her riding it, circling the yard in uneven loops, one shoelace always untied. "It wasn't an accident," Johnson said. "That thing was buried deep. It wasn't part of the original slab, for it was placed there before the concrete went down." I turned to Harland. Was there anything else?" He shook his head. "No human remains, just the bike. But it's enough to reopen the case officially." He paused, watching me closely. "We'll take it from here, Laura. I promise we'll be careful." I nodded again, but my mind had already jumped ahead. I needed to know who had stayed in that house over the years. Who'd had access to that garage. "We've already contacted the caretaker," Harland said, reading my thoughts. "Name's Ernest Mallory. Been managing the place since it was listed on Airbnb about 10 years back. We're also reaching out to the property owner, Vance Holloway. He lives in Switzerland now. Keeps the place as a rental." I followed them back outside just as a patrol car was pulling up. 2 uniformed officers stepped out, guiding an older man across the gravel drive. His hair was gray, cut close to the scalp, and he walked with a stoop that made him look shorter than he probably was. "That's Mallory Harland," said quietly. "Let's see what he has to say." Up close, he looked tired. Not in the way people look after a long shift, but deeper, like it had settled into his bones. Mr. Mallory Harland began, "We've recovered a bicycle from the property garage believed to belong to Emily Forrester. She disappeared 12 years ago." Ernest didn't meet my eyes, just stared at the ground, blinking fast. "I don't know anything about that," he said quickly. "I just take care of the place. I don't do construction. I just mow the lawn clean between guests, fix leaky pipes, stuff like that." "How long have you worked here?" 10 years, since Mr. Holloway moved overseas. I came on after the place was already built. So you weren't here when the garage was poured? No, sir. That was before my time. I watched him carefully. He wasn't lying, not outright, but his hands kept shifting, fiddling with the hem of his jacket, and his eyes flicked toward the garage every few seconds. Harland kept pressing. Would any guests have had reason to dig into that garage floor? No. No one would have done that, not unless they were doing something illegal. And I would have seen it. You said you managed the guest logs. Yes. I keep everything on file: dates, names, driver's licenses. Some folks stayed a few nights, some for months at a time. Especially since COVID remote work long-term stays. It's all logged. One of the officers tapped on a tablet. Property records show the house was built in 2010. That's 1 year before the girl disappeared. Ernest looked up sharply. Well, then maybe the bike was buried during construction. I wasn't even working for Mr. Holloway then. Harland's face didn't change, but his tone cooled slightly. You're one of only 2 people with unrestricted access to this property. You understand that makes you a person of interest until we rule things out. I get it, Ernest said quickly. I'll cooperate. I'll give you everything. I want to help. I believed he wanted to seem helpful, but I also believed he was afraid. Not of us, but of something unraveling. Harland told the officers to coordinate with international law enforcement. They'd be reaching out to Holloway in Zurich. In the meantime, the property would be sealed off. Guest records, emails, booking logs, they'd all be reviewed. Before we left, Harlan turned to me. "The media's been notified. They'll probably show up within the hour. You don't have to speak with them." "I won't," I said. "Not right now." He nodded, then offered to have an officer drive me home. As we pulled away, I looked back once more at the garage. The concrete slab still broken. The officers still moving carefully inside. It was the first real lead in 12 years, and for the first time in all those years, I felt something shift inside me, like a window cracked just enough to let in a breeze. That night, after I got home and changed out of my uniform, I sat at my computer in the room that used to be Emily's. I logged into a forum I'd been part of for years, Missing Children Support Network. I typed out what had happened. That they'd found her bike. That it had been buried under concrete less than a mile from my house. I attached a photo from the scene, not of the full pit, just a corner of the bike, the basket still clinging to the front like it was waiting for a stuffed animal to be placed inside. Messages flooded in within minutes. Support. Hope. The usual mixture of sympathy and distant prayers. But then one message. Private. From a new account with no name. I clicked on it. It was a photo one I recognized. An old picture I'd posted years ago of Emily on that same bike in our front yard. Only now her face had been replaced with a pig's head. A second attachment video. Someone chopping a pig's head, wrapping it in plastic. Then a caption, "Your daughter's as dead as this pig. Just accept it and live with it." I stared at the screen, breath frozen. Then I shut the laptop and ran to the bathroom. I didn't stop vomiting until there was nothing left in me. Later, after I'd cleaned up, I opened the message again. Took screenshots, sent them to Harland. Tried to track the account, but it was new empty. A shell. Maybe someone trying to scare me. Or maybe something else. The timing wasn't random. The video had details trees in the background that didn't look like anything around here. More like European pines. Harland called me back after reviewing the footage. "Could be a diversion," he said. "Whoever sent this wanted us to look the other way." "Do you think it's the property owner?" I asked. "Can't rule it out. But it could be someone else. A former guest. Or someone who knows we're looking." The only thing I knew for sure was this someone was watching. Someone who wanted me to stop. But I wasn't going to. Not now. Not when I was this close. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake for hours, listening to the house creak and shift around me. At 4:03 a.m., I gave up. Got dressed. Grabbed my keys. I figured I'd head to the bakery early. Clear my head. But as I drove past the Airbnb house, I saw something I wasn't expecting. A light. Flickering inside. Then going dark. And parked out front, quiet, barely visible in the trees, was a white van. Not a police vehicle. Something else. I slowed down, pulled off the road, watched. Then I saw him. Ernest. Moving fast. Carrying something. Loading the van. And that's when I knew. He hadn't told us everything. Not even close. He spotted me before I meant for him to. I must have stepped on a loose patch of gravel just enough to make him turn. Ernest stopped in his tracks halfway between the garage and the van, some kind of bundle clutched awkwardly to his chest. For a second, neither of us said anything. Then he asked, "Who's there?" His voice wasn't angry. It was tight, like he already knew the answer, but needed to buy himself a few seconds. I stepped out where he could see me and kept my hands visible. "It's Laura Forrester," I said. Emily's mother. He didn't move, but I saw the way his posture shifted. Not fear, just calculation. "What are you doing here?" he asked. His words rushed now. "It's almost 4 in the morning. I nodded toward the van. "I could ask you the same thing." There was a pause. Then he straightened a little and glanced at the bundle. "Mr. Holloway called," he said, already turning back toward the van. "Said the police needed property records, insurance documents. I was told to come by and get them before things got misplaced. I'm just following instructions." I watched him place the bundle inside the van, careful not to let me see what it was. At 4 a.m, I asked. The lights were off when I drove by. Then they were on. Now they're off again. He didn't answer that. Just said Mr. Holloway's in Switzerland. It's already morning there. I let that hang in the air, then said quietly, "You should let Detective Harland know you're here. He told me this place was off limits." Ernest closed the van door more gently than I expected and turned back to face me. "You shouldn't be out here either, Miss Forrester. This is a crime scene now." I didn't argue. Just gave a small nod and turned toward my car. He watched me until I was behind the wheel. Then I watched him in my rearview mirror as he got into the van and pulled away. I waited until his headlights disappeared around the bend. Then I picked up my phone and called Harland. He answered quicker than I expected. "It's Laura," I said. "I just saw Ernest at the Airbnb house. He was carrying something. Said he was there to pick up papers for Mr. Holloway." Harland's voice hardened. "That's not true. No one's been given access, especially not him." I could hear the sound of keys jingling on his end. "Where is he now?" "He went west on Cedar Ridge," I told him. "What do you want me to do?" "Nothing," he said firmly. "Do not follow him. Stay where you are. I'll send someone to you. We'll intercept him." I promised I would. I even meant it at the time. But then I sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, watching the dark road ahead, and the thought hit me hard. What if this was the last chance? What if he was trying to erase something to destroy it before anyone else could find it? I started the engine. Told myself I'd just keep him in sight. No confrontation, no risk, just see where he was going. Cedar Ridge Road wound west into denser forest. The houses thinned out. Streetlights faded. I kept my headlights dim and stayed far enough back that he wouldn't spot me in his mirrors. I was less than 10 minutes in when I spotted the van pulled off onto the shoulder near a patch of tall trees. His engine was off. No movement. I turned off my own lights and waited. Then through the trees I caught sight of thin smoke curling upward, black, acrid, and wrong. Not the kind you get from yard debris. Something heavier, chemical. I cracked my window slightly and the smell confirmed it. I didn't need to see the fire to know he was burning something. A few minutes later, he stepped out from the trees, dragging a metal barrel behind him. One of those burn barrels people use out in the county. He was moving quickly. Nervous. I watched him load it into the back of the van, then stand there for a long moment, breathing hard, hands on his hips. He looked around, then climbed back into the driver's seat and started the engine. As soon as he disappeared around the bend, I turned my car back on and followed. The cell signal was terrible, but I managed to get one call through to Harland. It was patchy, his voice cutting in and out, but I said what I could, that I saw the barrel, that he was burning something, and he was headed west again. Harland's voice came through faintly. "Don't follow. Dangerous. We're on our way." Then it cut out completely. I kept going anyway. About 5 miles later, Ernest turned off onto a narrow private lane. The GPS labeled it Whispering Pines. I drove past the entrance and pulled over, parked where the trees would shield me from view, and waited. After a few minutes, I eased the car into reverse, backed down the shoulder, and turned onto the lane. I kept my speed low, barely idling. The road was rough-lined with pines and underbrush, so thick it nearly scraped my side mirrors. I came to a clearing, a cul-de-sac with 4 or 5 homes spaced far apart. Ernest's van was parked outside a small single-story house with blue siding and a crumbling mailbox. I stayed hidden in the trees and used my phone camera to zoom in. He was unloading the burn barrel again, dragging it around the side of the house. A few minutes later, he reappeared, this time with a flat metal trolley. It was red, industrial-looking, like something you'd use to move heavy boxes in a warehouse. He disappeared back inside. When he returned, he was struggling to lift something onto the trolley. It was large and covered in a tarp or blanket. I couldn't make out what it was. He moved slowly, carefully, as if it weighed a lot. Once it was in place, he wheeled it to the van and loaded it inside. Then he repeated the process, a second load, then a third. After the last trip, he folded the trolley and shoved it into the van, slammed the doors shut, and climbed back into the driver's seat. I snapped as many photos as I could, knowing they were blurry and grainy, but still proof of something. I tried Harland again. This time, the line was clearer. "I'm parked off Whispering Pines," I said. "He's loading something into the van. 3 trips so far. He's about to leave." Harland's tone changed immediately. "Stay put. We're close. Our units are approaching from both ends. He won't get far." I watched as Ernest's van pulled back down the lane toward the road. I ducked down in my seat and waited. Within seconds, I saw flashing lights sweep across the trees. 2 police cruisers moved in fast, one blocking the lane ahead, the other pulling behind his van. No sirens, just lights. Officers stepped out with weapons drawn, ordering him to exit the vehicle. He did. Slowly. Hands raised. No resistance. Harland was there too. He spoke quietly to the officers, then turned toward the rear of the van. One of them opened the doors. I couldn't see inside. But I saw their faces. I saw how quickly things shifted, how a call went out on the radio, urgent and clipped. Then came the ambulance, then the stretchers. I got out of my car and walked forward. A young officer moved to stop me, but Harland saw me and waved me through. He met me halfway and placed a hand on my arm. "You need to prepare yourself," he said. "They're alive, all 3 of them. He was trying to move them before we could find out." I didn't understand at first. Who's alive?" I asked. He turned and led me to the open van. The officers were carefully lifting 3 body bags from the back. Except, they weren't body bags. Not really. They were containment stretchers zipped shut but not sealed. One of the medics opened the first. Inside was a young woman, thin, unconscious but breathing. Blonde. Pale. Older than the child I remembered. But I knew her. I knew that face. "Emily," I said. My legs buckled. Harland caught me before I hit the ground. "She's sedated," he said quietly. "But she's alive." I looked at her again, her face slack with medication. Her hands curled loosely at her sides. And for the first time in 12 years, I didn't feel lost. I felt like I was standing on solid ground again. Harland spoke softly beside me, his voice nearly drowned by the motion around us. "We got here just in time." He paused. "You're the reason we did." I didn't respond. Couldn't. I just kept my eyes on her face, on the proof that after all the silence, she was still here, and the story wasn't over. Not yet. The ambulance ride to Cedar Brook Memorial felt both endless and over in an instant. I sat beside Emily's stretcher the entire way, holding her hand and watching her chest rise and fall in slow, shallow rhythm. The medic across from me checked her vitals every few minutes, nodding each time like he didn't want to speak out loud. I couldn't stop looking at her face. It had changed, of course. The roundness was gone, her features sharper, older. But I still saw her as she'd been 8 years old, riding that pink bike barefoot in our driveway, asking if she could have waffles for dinner. The lights of the hospital came into view just as dawn broke. The ambulance pulled into the emergency entrance and the doors opened to a team already waiting. Everything moved quickly. Emily and the other two girls were wheeled in through separate doors, nurses calling out instructions, doctors moving like they already knew what each step required. I was told to wait in a side room until someone could update me. There was coffee on a small table, still hot, but I didn't touch it. The silence in that waiting room was different from the quiet I'd known for the last 12 years. This wasn't grief or numbness. It was something else. I couldn't name it yet. Maybe I didn't want to. Detective Harland came in about 20 minutes later holding a small notebook and a manila folder tucked under one arm. His shirt was wrinkled tie askew, but his voice was steady when he sat across from me. "She's stable," he said first. "All three are. Still unconscious, but they're breathing on their own. No signs of immediate trauma." I nodded, still waiting to feel something more than just the dull ache behind my eyes. "Do we know who the other two are?" He flipped open the folder. Tentatively, yes. One appears to be Kayla Bennett, missing from Portland since 2012. The other, Juliana Ramirez, disappeared in 2010 during a school field trip in Seattle. Both match age and physical descriptions from their original reports. I stared at him. They were children when they vanished. 9 and 10, he said, now both in their 20s. He didn't say the rest, but I could feel it anyway. Years, entire lives taken and reshaped into something none of us could yet understand. "Has Ernest said anything?" I asked. Harland shook his head. He asked for a lawyer immediately. But we found journals in his house, dozens. Records of each girl's routines, notes on their behavior, even drawings. He didn't see himself as a captor. He called himself their guardian, wrote about protecting them from a world that didn't deserve them. I looked down at my hands. My nails were short, clean, the polish chipped from work. I hadn't noticed the tremble in them until that moment. Where did he keep them? "There's a storm bunker under the house," Harland said. "Soundproofed, no windows, stocked with supplies. It appears he only let them out under close supervision and not often. There's a small fenced area in the back covered by latticework and vines. That may have been their only exposure to sunlight." I wanted to ask how no one had noticed, how you could keep 3 human beings hidden for over a decade without a single neighbor raising alarm. But I already knew the answer. People keep to themselves. They assume things. A curtain drawn all day. Maybe someone works nights, a man who rarely talks, just private. There's a kind of politeness that can become dangerous when it stops us from asking hard questions. A knock at the door interrupted us. A nurse leaned in and told me one of the girls, Emily, was starting to stir. I followed her down a quiet corridor to a private room where a uniformed officer stood just outside the door. Inside the room was dimly lit. Machines blinked softly around the bed. Emily lay still, but I could see her eyelids fluttering. I moved to her side and sat down, taking her hand again, just like I had in the ambulance. Her fingers twitched in mine. Then slowly her eyes opened. They were unfocused at first, pupils wide from whatever they'd given her. But as she blinked and looked around, her gaze settled on my face. For a moment, she didn't say anything. Then hoarse and fragile Mom. I leaned in. "I'm here, sweetheart." Her lip trembled. "Where's Ernest?" I glanced at the nurse who stepped back quietly to give us space. "He's gone. They arrested him. You're safe now. You're in the hospital." She closed her eyes again, breathing hard. I thought I'd never see you again." I brushed her hair gently back from her forehead. I never stopped looking. Never. Dr. Patel came in a few minutes later to check her vitals and speak with her briefly. He said she was stable, that they'd monitor her closely, and that she'd need rest before giving any formal statement. Emily nodded slowly when she was told, still groggy but lucid. When Harland came in, he stayed near the door. "I don't want to push," he said gently, "but anything you remember, anything at all, could help." Emily turned her head toward him. "I was riding my bike," she said, her voice faint. He drove by in his truck, said he had a kitten, told me I could bring my bike, that it was just down the road. I could hear the strain in her voice, remembering that day like it had happened yesterday. He gave me a juice box. I was thirsty. After that, it got blurry. She looked back at me. I woke up in a room, a basement, I think. Kayla was already there. Jules came later. Harland was quiet, scribbling in his notebook. Did he ever tell you why he took you? He said our parents didn't watch us, she answered. That we were better off with him. He said the world outside was dangerous. Sometimes he'd tell us there was a war, that we were the only ones left. I felt the air leave my lungs. But we knew, Emily added. We saw things. Newspapers. Things on the radio when he forgot to unplug it. We didn't believe him. She shifted slightly under the blanket. We wanted to leave. We tried, but he was always watching. Dr. Patel stepped in again, saying it was enough for now. Harland closed his notebook but promised to return later for a full statement. Before he left, he turned back and said quietly, "We believe he was planning to move you, soon. Maybe even sell you. We found messages on his laptop, contacts. It's possible this wasn't the first time he did something like this." Emily closed her eyes, and I saw her jaw clench. "Good," she whispered. "Then I hope you never let him out." After they left, I stayed by her side. The hospital noises faded into background hum. I watched the rise and fall of her chest, the way her fingers twitched even in sleep. And for the first time in 12 years, I wasn't just surviving. I was waiting for something real. For her voice, for the answers she still carried. But mostly I was waiting for her to come back all the way, because I could see it now she hadn't vanished. She'd been forced into silence, and now she was starting to speak. That night, after Emily had drifted back to sleep, I stayed by her bedside with the lights low and the hallway outside quiet. The nurse came in once to check her IV, then again a few hours later to adjust the monitors. I didn't move much. I just watched her, her breathing, the faint twitch of her fingers, the way her jaw tensed, even in sleep, like her body hadn't fully relaxed yet. Around 3:30 in the morning, I stepped out into the waiting area for some air. The hospital was still the vending machine, humming softly in the corner, a janitor mopping slowly down the hallway. When I got back to Emily's room, Harland was already waiting. He stood up when he saw me and motioned for me to sit down. He looked tired but focused the way he always did when something had shifted. "We've started going through Ernest's journals," he said. "There's a lot. He documented everything. Routines, meals, even the tone of their voices day to day." He paused and opened a thin file. He kept detailed notes about Emily. She was the first. I stayed quiet, letting him continue. We also found references to the Airbnb property. He was present during the early construction phase before the garage was poured. We confirmed with the owner, Vance Holloway, that Ernest worked as a subcontractor on that job. I looked up. "So he buried the bike himself?" Harland nodded. "Before the slab was sealed. Before the place even had a roof. It's how he kept the connection hidden. The bike was evidence. But he knew once it was under 6 inches of concrete, no one would think to look." I felt my hands tighten in my lap. Why now, I asked. Why was he trying to move them? Why the rush? Harland leaned forward. "That's what we're piecing together." We found messages on his laptop, encrypted emails, chat transcripts from the dark web. He was in contact with people overseas. There are references to a transfer, multiple references to timelines, compliance, and packaging. He let that word sit between us a moment too long. We believe he was preparing to sell them. My mouth went dry. Like trafficking. "Yes," he said. "We think it was escalating. He'd kept them isolated and dependent for years, But as they got older, more aware, more resistant, he started to see them as liabilities. He wrote that they were slipping and asking too many questions. I felt the weight of it settle into my chest. If I hadn't driven past that house, if I hadn't seen him loading the van— Harland shook his head. You did. That's what matters. You saw it. He closed the file and folded his hands. There's something else. The video you received, the one with the pig's head. I nodded slowly. We traced it back to his laptop. He created a new account just to send it. The video itself was a composite real footage mixed with AI-generated frames to make it look like it came from Europe. It was meant to mislead, throw suspicion toward Holloway. I felt a flicker of something, maybe anger, maybe just exhaustion. He wanted me to give up. He wanted time, Harland said, to disappear with them before we got too close. But the bike being found changed the clock. That discovery forced his hand. If the forensics team had gotten to the garage a day earlier, maybe we wouldn't be sitting here now. I sat back and looked out the small window. The sky outside was beginning to pale. Morning again. Another one. They just kept coming. Harland stood. We'll need formal statements from all three girls when they're strong enough. But we're not rushing it. Right now, the goal is stability. I nodded. Thank you, I said. He gave a quiet nod in return and left me alone in the room. When I turned back to Emily, she was awake again. Her eyes were open, watching me. Was that about him? She asked. Her voice was steadier this time, though still hoarse. Yes, I said, taking her hand again. They found his journals, his computer. They're piecing it together. She didn't speak right away. Then she said, He said we were special, that no one else would care for us the way he did. Her voice didn't waver, but I could hear something underneath. We tried to believe that. We had to. There were days we thought he might be right. He wasn't, I said. You were never forgotten. Not for a second. Emily's eyes filled, but she blinked quickly and looked away. I always thought if someone found us, we'd just be taken away again, locked up somewhere, observed, examined, like animals. That's not going to happen, I told her. You're going to heal in your own time. We'll make sure of it. She was quiet, then asked, Did you ever stop looking? I shook my head. No. I stopped knowing where to look, but I never stopped. The nurse came in again this time to bring in a tray of water and light food. Emily tried to sit up and I helped her ease upright. Her movements were stiff, unpracticed, like someone who hadn't had to use her muscles for real motion in a long time. She picked at the toast, but managed a few bites. When the nurse stepped out, she looked at me again. I remember the day he took me. I was on my bike. He said he had kittens. I believed him. Her voice cracked on the last word. I shouldn't have. I was stupid. You were 8, I said. You were trusting. That's not the same thing. She exhaled slowly and leaned her head back against the pillow. Kayla and Jules. They're stronger than they look. We kept each other from falling apart. We had a system. If he got mad, we would rotate who talked. If one of us was sick, the others covered. I wouldn't have made it alone. I listened. I didn't interrupt. There was a quiet in her voice that didn't need answers, only space. We thought about trying to escape, she added. More than once. But the doors were locked from the outside. The windows didn't open. There was a security camera in the hallway. Every time we got close, something would happen. He'd know. Her eyes drifted toward the window again. I don't know what comes next. I don't know who I am anymore. You're still you, I said, keeping my voice calm. You're still my daughter. And we'll figure it out together. She didn't reply, but her hand tightened around mine. The machines beside her beeped steadily, each sound a reminder that time was moving forward again, that breath followed breath, that the world had shifted but not ended. A few minutes later, she fell asleep again, her body finally giving in to the exhaustion that had been riding her since she woke up. I sat there a while longer, not saying anything, just watching her chest rise and fall. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out the notebook I'd brought with me every day since they found the bike. I opened it to a blank page and began to write down everything I could remember from the past 3 days. Every conversation, every detail, every word Emily had said. I didn't know what parts would matter, but I wrote it all anyway. At the bottom of the page, I circled a phrase Harland had mentioned earlier, something from one of Ernest's journal entries. Slipping. Asking too many questions. I stared at it for a long time. Then I turned the page and kept writing. It was 2 days later when Harland called me again. I was back at the hospital sitting beside Emily while she slept when my phone buzzed. His voice was low, like he was already somewhere quiet. "I need to show you something," he said. "Can you meet me at the station?" I asked if it could wait, and he hesitated before saying, "You'll want to see this for yourself." So I kissed Emily's forehead, told the nurse where I'd be, and left the building with that heavy, steady feeling in my chest again, the kind that makes your hands cold even in summer. When I got to the station, Harland was in the evidence room with a cardboard box on the table. His tie was off, sleeves rolled, and his expression unreadable. He didn't say anything at first, just nodded toward the box. I walked over and looked inside. There were photographs, handwritten notes, and a stack of old cassette tapes. On top was a hardbound ledger, dark green with a name embossed on the spine, Halbrook M. I looked at him. "This isn't Ernest's, no," he said. "It's his mother's. Margaret Halbrook. She died in 2001, lived out in the woods near Kitsap. He inherited the property after she passed. We always assumed he started all this after moving in, but this ledger suggests otherwise." I opened it. The pages were filled with tidy cursive, each entry dated and numbered. There were names, locations, even sketches of faces. Some crossed out, others circled. One line caught my eye. "Lucia. Too talkative. Must reinforce boundaries." I felt my stomach turn. These aren't just thoughts I said. They're evaluations. Harland nodded. "We believe Margaret ran something of her own. Possibly a grooming operation. Rural counseling retreats. Foster care sponsorships. Nothing on paper ever stuck. But this book suggests she was keeping children out there, and when she died, Ernest didn't stop. He just picked up where she left off." I reached for one of the tapes and turned it over in my hand. There was a white sticker on it, April 1989. "They're mostly audio logs," Harland said. "Some are interviews, others. It's harder to say." I placed it back in the box. "Why show me this?" He looked at me carefully. "Because there's one more thing, and I didn't want you hearing it from anyone else." He pulled a photo from the bottom of the stack and laid it flat on the table. It was old, curled at the edges, the color slightly faded. It showed a little girl, maybe 6 or 7, standing barefoot in a gravel driveway. Her hair was long and dark, and she held a worn stuffed animal in one hand. Next to her stood Margaret Halbrook, one hand resting on the girl's shoulder. "That's Lucia," Harland said. "Taken in 1990. She was listed as a ward of the state after her mother died in a fire. But according to this ledger, Margaret took her in privately. No official record, no placement forms." I stared at the image, trying to reconcile the young face with the name I'd only ever seen typed in reports. What happened to her? We don't know. The last entry that mentions her is in 94. Then nothing. It's possible she was moved. Or... He didn't finish the sentence. I didn't ask him to. Instead, I asked if I could take the photo. He paused, then handed it over. "There's more," he added. "We found something at the Halbrook property, a crawlspace behind the root cellar, completely sealed. We're opening it tomorrow with forensics. If there's anything inside, we'll know soon." I left the station with that photo tucked into my bag and drove straight back to the hospital. Emily was awake, sipping juice through a straw, her eyes clearer than they'd been in days. I sat beside her and waited until she looked up. "Did he ever talk about someone named Margaret?" I asked. "His mother." She paused. "He had a picture of a woman in a white apron. He called her Mama Mags, said she taught him everything." She set the straw down. "When we first got there, he told us we had to follow the house rules, same ones she used. No noise after dark, no windows open, no crying." I leaned forward. "Did he ever mention another girl?" "Someone named Lucia." Emily's expression changed. Her eyes drifted slightly like she was pulling something from the back of her mind. "There was a name on the wall," she said, "scratched into the paint. Lucia plus light." I didn't know what it meant. We thought maybe it was from before us. I pulled out the photo and handed it to her. She studied it in silence. "That's her," she said softly. "That's the name. He got mad when we asked about it. Said she was a lesson." "What kind of lesson?" She shook her head. "He never said. Just that she didn't obey. That she didn't make it." I sat back, trying to keep my face still. My heart was pounding again, but I didn't want her to see it. "Do you remember anything else?" "There was a hatch," she said, "in the back room. He always kept it locked, said it was broken plumbing. But we heard noises once, scratching. We thought it was rats. I felt something cold move through me. Did it ever open? Only once. During a storm, the power went out. We heard it unlatch. He ran down and slammed it shut so fast we barely saw what was inside. But I remember shelves, jars, a mattress." She looked at me. It smelled like dirt and bleach. I didn't press further. I let her drink her juice and rest, and I stayed beside her until visiting hours ended. That night I sat in my car outside the hospital with the windows cracked just enough to let the cool air in. I took out the photo of Lucia again and stared at her face. Then I flipped it over. There was a small note in faint pencil almost rubbed away, "Watch the light under the floor." The words hit differently now, not poetic, not abstract. They were a direction, a location. I didn't sleep that night, and at 7 the next morning I drove north toward Kitsap, toward the woods where Margaret Halbrook had lived and died, toward the place where Ernest learned the rules. The gravel road was overgrown by the time I reached the edge of the property. I parked half a mile out and walked the rest. The trees were dense, the air damp and heavy with moss. The old house looked abandoned from the outside roof, sagging porch steps, crumbling windows fogged with dust. But the lock on the front door was new. Inside, the floorboards creaked underfoot. I moved slowly, checking each corner, each shadow. The place smelled like mildew and old metal. I passed the root cellar, just like Harlan said, and found the back room. The hatch was still there, nearly hidden beneath an old rug. I pulled it back and found the handle, locked, but not with a padlock, just a rusted latch screwed into the frame. I used a screwdriver from my bag and pried it loose. The hatch groaned open and a rush of cold air came up from below. I turned on my flashlight and aimed it down. There were stairs, wooden and narrow. I moved slowly, every creak echoing in the silence. The room at the bottom was small. Cinder block walls, one cot, one plastic chair. Shelves filled with cans, medical kits, and notebooks wrapped in plastic. In the far corner, a single bare bulb dangled from the ceiling. Underneath it, etched faintly into the concrete, were 2 words, "Lucia was." That's all. Not "Lucia was here." Just "Lucia was." I stood there a long time, listening to nothing. Then I turned off the light and climbed back up into daylight. I called Harland on the way back, told him what I found. And this time, I didn't ask permission to be there. I just told him plainly, "You need to bring your team. Today." Because whatever this was, it didn't start with Ernest. and it hadn't ended with him either. Harlan's team arrived just after noon, 2 black SUVs pulling down the overgrown drive tires, crunching through gravel and damp pine needles. I stepped back as they parked, watching the agents move with quiet coordination gloves pulled on gear loaded from the trunk. No sirens, no scene tape, just the kind of slow, serious motion that meant something was about to change. I led them to the hatch. It was still open, the rug folded off to one side. No one had touched the interior since I climbed back out. Harlan was the last to arrive. He nodded to me, said nothing, then followed the lead technician down the narrow stairs with his flashlight raised. I stayed by the door. I didn't need to go back down there. I'd seen enough. But I watched every step they took, every bag sealed, every tool laid out on canvas. They took photographs of the etching in the concrete, samples from the mattress, the air, the walls, and in the far corner behind a loose board near the shelf they found the teeth, 8 of them. Human, small, clean, placed carefully in a plastic sandwich bag that had turned nearly opaque with age. Harlan didn't say anything at first. He just stood in the middle of the room, flashlight resting against his thigh. Then he turned slowly toward the west wall and ran his hand along the cinder blocks. "There's something behind here," he said. One of the younger agents came forward and tapped the wall with a metal rod. Hollow. They brought in a drill, low-powered, just enough to break through the surface. When the block gave way, it opened into a shallow recess filled with jars. Dozens of them stacked and labeled. Each one held a strip of paper soaked in something dark. Some looked like fingernail clippings, others like bits of cloth. There was one labeled Kayla, Promise, another marked Emily, Truth, and further back, barely legible through the grime, Lucia, Light. Harlan ordered the room sealed immediately. Forensics began cataloging every item, photographing and tagging as they went. The temperature felt like it dropped 10 degrees once they uncovered that cavity. One of the techs started to breathe too fast and had to be taken outside for air. Later, back up on the porch, Harlan met me with a clipboard and a bagged notebook. This wasn't just control, he said. It was ritual. He was building his own language, his own doctrine. I opened the notebook slowly. Inside were pages of diagrams, floor plans, escape routes, conditioning schedules. There was a grid with numbers and codes, and in the corner, a list titled Failsafes. The first entry read, 1. Transfer Plan, Fall 2004. 2. Asset Severance if non-compliant. 3. Purge. I felt the bile rise in my throat. So he was planning to kill them. Harlan didn't blink. If extraction failed, yes. The van was Plan A. This was Plan B. He turned the page. There, in neat handwriting, was another list. Names. At the bottom, Lucia failed exit. Observe. I stepped back from the notebook. What does that mean? We don't know yet, but if she died here, there's no record of it. And if she didn't... His voice trailed off. We have a lead, he added. An old neighbor, a man named Micah Halbrook, estranged relative, been off the grid for years but recently resurfaced in Idaho. He filed a tip years ago anonymous, but it matches details from the journal. We're tracking him now. I nodded slowly, still staring at the page. If he knows something, he might be the last link. He's more than that, Harlan said. He might have helped them, or tried to. We won't know until we talk to him. Back at the hospital that evening, Emily had a bad spell. Night tremors, they said. Her body jerked awake in the dark and she screamed before her brain had even caught up. It took 3 nurses and a sedative to calm her down. I stayed by her side the whole time, hand on her arm, voice low and steady. Kayla and Jules were doing better physically, but they wouldn't sleep with the lights off. Not yet. They asked me what would happen to Ernest. I told them he was dead, but they still didn't believe it. Not fully. He said he'd never leave Jules whispered, that even if he died, the house would stay with us. I brushed the hair from her face. He lied about everything. The house isn't yours anymore. None of it is. She didn't answer, just closed her eyes and pulled the blanket up to her chin. After the girls were asleep, I sat in the waiting room by myself and listened to one of the recovered tapes through a set of wired headphones. Harland had given me permission to review it. The audio was grainy but clear. A young voice, Lucia's, I guessed was reciting words in a sequence. Obey. Clean. Silence. Light. Over and over. Then a pause. Then Ernest's voice, calm, quiet, too close to the microphone. You're doing better. But we mustn't slip. Remember what happened last time? Lucia didn't answer. There was a long silence, then the sound of something being placed on a surface. You don't want the light to go away again, do you? He said. The tape clicked off. I sat with the headphones around my neck for a while after that, staring at nothing. The hallway light buzzed softly above me. Somewhere down the corridor, a cartwheel squeaked. I pressed the photo of Lucia between my fingers and whispered her name under my breath like it might reach wherever she was. And then, in that small, quiet hour before morning, Harlan texted Micah Hallbrook's been located. He's agreed to meet. No punctuation, no details, just that. I closed my notebook, stood slowly, and walked back toward the room where Emily slept. Because we weren't done yet. Not even close. Micah Hallbrook lived in a 2-room trailer tucked behind a bait shop off Highway 12, maybe half a mile from the Snake River. It wasn't much to look at: metal siding, a single porch light, a screen door patched with duct tape, but the moment I stepped out of the car, I knew we were in the right place. The land felt still. Not peaceful, just waiting. Harland was already inside when I arrived. Micah sat at the table, hands folded back straight, a coffee mug in front of him that he hadn't touched. He was older than I expected. Late 60s maybe, with tired eyes and a slow, careful way of speaking like he weighed every word before letting it go. I sat across from him, and he looked at me like he already knew who I was. "You're Emily's mother," he said. I nodded. "I'm Margaret." He gave a slight nod back, then looked down. "I tried to stop it," he said. "I did. But by the time I understood what he was doing, really doing, he already had them." I stayed quiet. Harlan didn't move. Ernest wasn't always like that, Micah said. Growing up, he was the quiet one, kind to animals, polite to neighbors. But something in him changed after he came back from Oregon. He'd been working construction alone, mostly cash jobs, and when he returned, he was different. Secretive, controlling, obsessed with rules. He kept notebooks even back then. Lined everything up like it was a formula. He looked up at me. I didn't know about the girls at first. Not until Lucia. The room felt like it had shrunk around us. I saw her once, he went on. By accident. I stopped by the cabin to drop off some tools and found the back door open. I walked in and heard a voice, a child's voice behind the wall, singing. He shook his head slowly. He said she was a niece, said she was there for the summer. But she was too quiet, too afraid, and she never came outside. My fingers tightened around the strap of my bag. "Did you report it?" "I tried," he said, his voice low. "Called the sheriff's office, gave them what I knew. But I was just a name on a line. No proof, no follow-up." He looked down again. And I was afraid. He made sure of that. Harland leaned in then. "Tell us about the trap door. About what's still under that cabin." Micah exhaled through his nose. "I helped him dig it, back when he said he was building a wine cellar. Just the two of us working in the cold. He said it had to be soundproofed, temperature-controlled. Said it was for storage." He paused. "But once the walls went up, he wouldn't let me down there again. Locked it. Changed the padlock every few weeks. So you knew, I said. You knew he had them. He didn't answer right away. I suspected, he said. I didn't have proof. But I saw things, clothes that didn't fit him, hairbrushes with long strands, a box of dolls in the burn pile out back. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know how deep it went. Harland opened the folder on the table and slid out one of the photographs, Lucia's school portrait, the one I'd carried for 16 years. He placed it in front of Micah. The old man flinched just slightly, but didn't look away. "She's still alive," I said. "We think so, but we need to know where he took her." Micah blinked, and something behind his eyes shifted. He talked about a place, he said slowly. Not by name, just described it. Said it was where the light would hold. Said it was cleaner than here. Higher. I thought it was just his rambling. But he kept referencing altitude, dry air, old trees. A cabin, Harland asked. Somewhere in the mountains. He never said cabin. Just the high house. Like it wasn't made for people. Like it had been waiting for him. He paused again, then added, "He kept a ledger. Handwritten. He'd never typed that part. It listed dates, shipments, storage codes. If you find that, it'll tell you everything." "Where is it?" I asked. "I don't know," Micah said, "but it wasn't in the cabin. He told me once when he was drunk that the real records weren't where anyone could burn them." He looked at me again, quieter now. He said they were buried where light met silence. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Not right then. Harland closed the folder and stood. "We're going to need you to come with us," he said. "You're not under arrest, but we need your help." Micah nodded without argument. "I've carried this too long," he said. "If she's alive, if any of them are, I want to help make it right." As we stepped outside, the wind had picked up. It was dry, sharp against the skin, the kind of chill that hinted snow wasn't far behind. Micah looked up at the clouds and whispered something I couldn't quite hear. Later that night, I sat alone at the hospital looking through Lucia's file again. Kayla had drawn a map from memory, a crooked series of turns, trees, and a hill, she said, sloped like a slide. She said they'd stopped there once, just once, long enough to hear another child crying. But Ernest told them it was just the wind. "Light and silence," I repeated to myself, tracing the edge of the paper. And then something clicked. Not loud, just a quiet sense of something I'd overlooked. The Holloway property, the basement where the bike was buried, was under a skylight. The window had been painted over from the outside, but if you stood in the right corner, just at the edge of the shadows, the light hit in a single diagonal line across the floor, where the etching had been, where the sound always seemed to disappear. I stood and pulled the folder from Harland's bag. Inside was the site survey, the original floor plans. At the far corner of the property, past the fire break and behind the septic tank, was a plot of land marked in the margin. No structure, no utility lines, just an X. It hadn't been excavated. Not yet. My chest tightened, because I knew. Somehow I knew. That's where he'd hidden it. Not the girls, not the bodies, the ledger, the truth. I picked up my phone and texted Harland. Check the eastern ridge behind the septic line. The light and silence match. I didn't wait for a reply. I just stood there in the quiet, watching the hallway stretch out in front of me, feeling like the walls were leaning in, not to trap me this time, but to finally, after all these years, let me through. They found the ledger 2 days later, buried exactly where Micah said it would be, where the light met silence. Under a patch of untouched ground behind the Holloway property, sealed inside a rusted tin box wrapped in plastic sheeting. The pages were handwritten in small, tight letters, columns of dates, symbols, names he never used twice. But the patterns were there. The same cycle, the same age range. Locations marked in shorthand that, once decoded, matched with every missing girl they'd suspected, and a few no one had even connected. Lucia's name wasn't written outright, but we found the mark he used for her, the exact one that had been scratched into the floorboards. Harlan said it quietly, but I heard it in his voice, relief. Not the kind that lifts you, the kind that settles in, like a weight that finally has a name. They brought Lucia home 3 days after that. She was thinner than I remembered, older, of course. Her hair had been dyed and cut unevenly, but her eyes, they were still hers. She didn't speak right away. We didn't force it. The doctors said she was malnourished but stable, traumatized but lucid. When she did talk, it was in short phrases, quiet ones. She asked for the swing set. She asked if I still made cinnamon rolls. I told her yes every week, whether she came home or not. Micah was placed under protective custody until the trial. He testified in full. So did Kayla. So did I. It was a closed hearing. No press, no jury, just the facts laid bare one after another until the judge finally said the words. I thought I'd never hear Ernest Holloway was found guilty of multiple counts kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, aggravated assault, and murder. They won't be seeking parole, not in his lifetime. I still visit the cabin sometimes, what's left of it. The county condemned it, but they haven't torn it down yet. It sits behind a line of plastic tape and rusted fencing. But the trees remember. You can feel it in the soil, in the way the birds avoid the clearing. Lucia doesn't ask about it, and I don't bring it up. Some places are better left in the past, even when the past isn't finished with you. She's in school now, not public. A quiet program for trauma recovery and creative therapy. She draws a lot, mostly water, lakes, rivers, rain. Sometimes she draws a house with no windows and a child standing outside it, always alone. But sometimes not anymore. Sometimes there's a figure beside her, holding her hand. I don't ask if it's me. I still think about the other names. The girls whose marks were in the ledger but whose faces never made the news, who never got a file or a flyer or a mother waiting on the porch. I think about the parents who moved or gave up or buried an empty box. Some of them will never know. Some of them still think their daughters ran away. Some of them are still setting a plate at the table every birthday. I don't believe in closure, not the way people talk about it. There are things you don't get back. Time. Trust. That part of your voice that was only ever soft. But I do believe in truth. Even if it takes 16 years to find it. Even if it lives underground. Truth has a way of surfacing, sometimes in a ledger, sometimes in a child's drawing, sometimes in the silence that isn't empty anymore. Thank you for staying through all of it. If this story stayed with you, consider sharing it so no name gets left behind.